If you've ever been in a relationship where every day you had to ask yourself, should I stay quiet today or explain? Should I endure or speak up? Then chances are you've been close to a narcissist. Not because you're weak, but because you feel deeply, love deeply, and hope deeply. And that depth is exactly what made you stay longer than you ever should have. In relationships like this, you don't stay because you lack reasons to leave. You stay because you believe that if you just understand more, try harder, love the right way, things will finally change. But the more you try, the more you lose yourself. The more you explain, the more your reality gets twisted. Then, one day quietly, almost unnoticed, something shifts. You stop arguing, you stop proving, you stop chasing validation, and you don't realize how dangerous that moment is for a narcissist. Because what they fear most isn't your anger, it's the moment you no longer need them to define your worth. In today's video, we're going to explore 8 ways an awakened empath can strip a narcissist of their power, not through confrontation, not through revenge, but through something far more unsettling to them: coming home to yourself. Weapon 1. Seeing through the illusion. And it all begins the moment you no longer need them to define your worth. A quiet ability starts to awaken, the ability to see clearly. While you were with a narcissist, you were often told you were too sensitive, overthinking, imagining things. They said you were the problem, that you misunderstood them. Over time, you learned to doubt your own perceptions. But the truth is, you were never wrong. You were simply perceiving too much in an environment designed to invalidate your reality. When an empath awakens, the first shift isn't power, it's clarity. You begin to notice patterns you once ignored, the change in their eyes when they don't get what they want, the coldness that follows affection, the promises that repeat without ever becoming action. There's no confusion anymore. No excuses made on their behalf. You don't need dramatic proof, your intuition has already collected enough data. What terrifies a narcissist isn't that you learned more. It's that you're no longer hypnotized by their narrative. They survive on illusion, the perfect image, the victim role, the special status. When you see through that illusion, it collapses. And for a narcissist, being seen clearly is far more threatening than being rejected. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to confront them. Simply seeing is enough. From that moment on, their tactics lose power. Love sounds hollow, threats fall flat, silence no longer triggers panic, and they feel that shift immediately as a nameless anxiety they can't control. Narcissists believe their mask is flawless, but awakened intuition is the one thing they cannot manipulate. When you stop asking, "Am I wrong?" and start asking, "Is this consistent?" the balance of power changes. You're not fighting them. You're simply no longer being led. This weapon is quiet, no applause, no drama, but it becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Because once you see clearly, you can never return to blindness. And that, even if they hide it well, is the moment the narcissist begins to lose control. Weapon 2. Intentional silence. And once you can see clearly, something almost inevitable happens. You speak less, not out of fear, but because you no longer need to prove anything. Before, every time they provoked you, you reacted. You explained, you tried to be understood, you tried to fix what wasn't yours to fix. But a narcissist doesn't listen to understand, they listen to control. Every emotion you offer becomes fuel. Every explanation becomes another entry point. Intentional silence is not avoidance. It is the choice to stop supplying reactions. You no longer debate right and wrong. You step out of endless loops. You respond briefly, neutrally, or not at all. And in that moment, their control system starts to fail. Narcissists feed on emotional reactions. Anger makes them feel powerful. Sadness makes them feel important. Pleading confirms their irreplaceability. When you go silent, you don't just withdraw energy, you erase their control panel. They don't know what you're thinking. They can't predict your next move. And that uncertainty deeply unsettles them. They will try everything to break that silence. Provocation, blame, playing the victim, sudden kindness. But if you maintain silence long enough, they realize something terrifying. They no longer control your emotional rhythm. You are self-regulating. This silence is not punishment. It is nervous system protection. Each time you don't react, your body learns it's safe to disengage. Each time you don't explain, you affirm that your worth doesn't require approval. Over time, that calm becomes a wall they cannot penetrate. For a narcissist, being ignored hurts more than being hated. Hate is still connection. Silence is disconnection. They can smear you to others, but they can't reach you. They can create chaos outside, but they can't pull you in. And when they realize they're talking into a void, panic sets in. Intentional silence teaches you a critical truth. Not every statement deserves a response. Not every accusation requires defense. You owe no one your emotional output. And when you truly grasp that, power shifts permanently. Weapon 3. Non-negotiable boundaries. And then, after silence, an even more decisive shift occurs. You don't just stop reacting, you start deciding who gets access to your inner world. With a narcissist, boundaries are not requests, they are not negotiations, they are the final line between autonomy and control. Before, you may have had boundaries without consequences. You said don't do that, but stayed when it happened again. You said this isn't okay, but kept explaining, accommodating, hoping they'd change. And the narcissist learned something dangerous. Your boundaries were flexible. Weapon 3 isn't about saying more, it's about doing less, but standing firmer. You stop over-explaining why you deserve respect. You stop debating your worth. You state a boundary clearly, and you disengage when it's crossed. This terrifies narcissists. Not verbal boundaries, but boundaries backed by action. When you say, I won't continue this conversation if you speak to me this way, and you actually leave, they lose a crucial advantage: unconditional access. Narcissists believe they're entitled to your time, emotions, and energy. They're used to your availability, your explanations, your soothing, your returns after harm. When you revoke that access, you don't attack them. You simply remove yourself from reach. Non-negotiable boundaries also mean accepting misunderstanding. They may call you cold, selfish, changed, or not who you used to be, but you understand a deeper truth. Anyone angered by your boundaries benefited from you having none. Psychologically, boundaries do what arguments never can. They restructure the power dynamic. You're no longer reacting, you're choosing. You stop asking, what should I do so they treat me better? And start asking, what do I allow in my life? Here's the core truth. Boundaries aren't meant to change the narcissist. They're meant to change you how you protect yourself, how you define worth, how you spend energy. When boundaries become consistent, the narcissist feels powerless, not because you overpower them, but because there's nothing left to manipulate. A relationship cannot survive when only one person keeps sacrificing themselves. When you stop sacrificing, the structure collapses, and that's when you realize boundaries aren't walls that keep love out. They are doors that open only to respect. Weapon 4. Truth exposure. And then, once silence unsettles them and boundaries revoke access, something inevitable happens. The truth begins to surface. Not loud truth, not public shaming for revenge, but truth no longer hidden, no longer protected by you. In many narcissistic relationships, there's a painful paradox. You know they're wrong, yet you shield them. You soften the story. You explain for them. You stay quiet when they distort reality. Not because they deserve it, but because you once hoped to preserve peace, image, or us. Weapon 4 appears when you stop being the keeper of the illusion. You don't smear them. You simply tell the truth, in the right place, at the right scale, and you don't retract it. You stop editing the narrative to make them look better. You stop taking responsibility for behavior that wasn't yours. You stop staying silent just so they can keep playing the victim. This is deeply threatening to narcissists because their power rests on controlling the narrative. They don't live by truth, they live by perception. When the story cracks, when small inconsistencies are named, when behavior is described accurately, the mask fractures. Crucially, truth exposure is not a moral crusade. You don't need the world to side with you. You just need to stop colluding with distortion. Sometimes it's a calm sentence. No, that's not what happened. Sometimes it's refusing to participate in a lie. Sometimes it's stating your boundary and reason without apologizing. Psychologically, this is the moment you reclaim something the narcissist long controlled, the right to define reality. Before, they defined you as too sensitive, difficult, the cause of every conflict. When you speak truth, you don't argue, you return reality to its rightful place. What truly frightens them isn't that you speak, it's that you're no longer afraid of consequences. You're no longer shaken by their anger, smears, or withdrawal, because you've realized any relationship that survives only by distorting truth was never safe to begin with. When truth enters, narcissists often respond in two ways: escalation or retreat. Both signal the same thing: you've touched the real weakness, not ego, but the fear of being seen. And here, something shifts within you. You stop trying to be understood by someone who refused to understand you. You choose to stand with yourself. Truth, at this stage, is no longer a weapon against them. It becomes the ground you stand on as you step out of the game. Weapon 5. Self-recovery and identity reconstruction. And here, the center of the story shifts. It's no longer about how the narcissist loses power, it's about who you are becoming. In a narcissistic relationship, the deepest damage isn't only what they did to you, but who you had to become to survive them. You learned to shrink your emotions, edit your words, monitor your reactions. You became hypervigilant, constantly asking, "Did I do something wrong?" That wasn't your true self. That was a survival identity. Weapon 5 emerges when you begin self-recovery, not to look stronger in their eyes, but to return to an unwarped identity. This step is unbearable for narcissists because it doesn't confront them directly, it cuts control at the root. Recovery isn't forced positivity, it's quiet, deep, and often painful. You start reconnecting with parts long suppressed: creativity, confidence, the right to say no, the ability to feel joy without permission. You listen to your body when it tightens, when it relaxes, instead of listening to fear of displeasing them. Alongside recovery comes identity reconstruction. You don't just heal old wounds, you redefine who you are beyond imposed roles. No longer too sensitive, hard to love, or the problem. You see clearly, those labels were never truth, they were control tools. Psychologically, this is the shift from reactive identity to intentional identity. You no longer act to avoid conflict, you act from values. You choose relationships where you can be yourself, not perform for acceptance. This deeply destabilizes narcissists because they cannot manipulate someone who no longer needs them to know who they are. When you recover, you don't just get healthier, you become unpredictable to them. No familiar buttons, no exploitable reactions, no self-sacrifice to keep peace. Many narcissists attempt to return at this stage, not out of love, but because they sense a structural change. You no longer orbit them. You have your own rhythm, energy, standards, and that triggers their deepest fear, no longer being central. For you, this is a hinge moment. You don't need to prove you're okay. You don't need to show strength. Continuing to live, grow, and protect your new identity, that is the answer. Weapon 5 isn't loud. It doesn't collapse the narcissist overnight, but it removes their place in your inner life. And once your identity is no longer defined by them, the game is already over. Weapon 6, strategic patience. And then, after everything, you no longer do no arguing, no explaining, no reacting, something else begins to work on your behalf. Time. Strategic patience is not powerless waiting. It is the highest form of agency for someone who understands the game. You don't stay silent to lure them back. You don't wait hoping they'll change. You stay patient because you know, every day without reaction weakens their control structure. Narcissists live on rapid feedback. They need stimulation, drama, friction to feel present in your mind. When conflict disappears, when there are no buttons to press, they don't know what to do with themselves. And that emptiness, not your words, begins to erode their power. Strategic patience means not rushing to conclusions, not labeling, not proving. You let time reveal what arguments never could: repetition, contradiction, the hollowness behind the mask. Without someone to manipulate, their tactics hit walls. Psychologically, this is when the narcissistic ego enters internal conflict. Without your responses to validate control, they must seek supply elsewhere, but replacements are never stable. They lack history, depth, and the emotional investment you once gave. Time exposes this slowly, but inevitably. Meanwhile, time does something else for you. It reinforces your new identity. Every week without drama stabilizes your nervous system. Every month without explaining clarifies your values. Patience doesn't just weaken them, it strengthens you. Crucially, strategic patience doesn't mean freezing your life. You don't stand still to stay safe. You live, you grow, you build a rhythm that doesn't require their attention. And when your life continues without them, a clear message is sent without words that the game has lost its audience. Narcissists often attempt to return when they sense this. But by then, strategic patience has done its hardest work. You're no longer activated. No anger, no hope, no need for answers. And without activation, there's nothing to manipulate. Weapon 6 closes power not with loud victory, but with the endurance of someone who has exited the game. You don't need to defeat them. You only need to keep living long enough for time to prove what truth always requires time to show. Weapon 7, remove the stage. And from here, once time has steadied you, you realize a cold but freeing truth. A narcissist doesn't exist in relationships as a person, they exist as a performance. When you react, you become the audience. When you explain, you become the supporting character. When you still need them to understand you, you unknowingly keep the script alive. That's why they keep trying to pull you back, even with one small message, one subtle jab, one tiny provocation. They don't need your love. They need your presence. Weapon 7 is when you step off the stage, not by announcing your exit, but by doing the hardest thing for an empath. You stop proving your reality. You stop answering questions that were never meant to understand you. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop correcting a game where truth was never the goal, only a prop. This is what terrifies them, losing the context to manipulate. Manipulation needs a stage, witnesses, narrative, circulation, a version of you they can retell. If you remain available, they still have something to grab: a dialogue, a fight, a topic. But if you step off the stage, they're left with themselves. And for them, that is crisis. They will try to pull you back in many ways. Perform indifference and happiness. Create drama so you feel forced to speak. Play the victim to trigger guilt. Resurrect sweet memories to reopen the door. Different tactics, same goal. Make you the audience again, because when you watch, they feel real. When you react, they feel powerful. Weapon 7 means you understand. Their weakness isn't being hated, it's being irrelevant. You don't need to expose them publicly to win. Winning is when you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. You live as if their performance was never the center of your life. You return it to what it always was, an old show, and you leave the theater. No audience, no power. Not because they become better, but because they no longer have a stage. Weapon 8, refuse your old self. And here, once you've stepped off the stage, the question is no longer, how do they lose power? It becomes, how do you ensure you never hand that power back again? Because the truth is, they may return. They may text, "I'm sorry." They may act gentle. They may tell a sad story. They may suddenly appear changed. But the real danger isn't their return, it's that they reactivate the old version of you. The version that needed to be understood. The version that believed better explanations would create change. The version that used kindness as survival. Weapon 8 is locking the door to that old self. Not from self-hate, but from self-respect. You understand kindness doesn't have to be proven through endurance. Love doesn't have to be proven through sacrifice. Empathy doesn't mean giving someone permission to hold a knife inside your life. This is the deepest liberation. You begin noticing the tiny triggers that once pulled you back under, a vague message that ruins your sleep, coldness that makes you self-blame. You've changed, that sparks panic. Before, you would rush to fix. Now you pause and see, this isn't love, it's activation, and you no longer follow activation as a compass. Weapon 8 is also recognizing, not everyone who returns deserves access to you. You no longer live to prove you're lovable. You don't need a beautiful ending to feel worthy. You don't need validation from someone who used validation as bait. You choose a simple truth. You are more peaceful without them. When you refuse your old self, you do what a narcissist cannot tolerate. You become emotionally ungovernable. You still have a heart, but it's no longer a button. You still have empathy, but it's no longer an open door. You still love, but love now has gates. And that is the final closure of power. Not their collapse, but your nervous system no longer making space for them. No fight, no revenge, just walking forward with a rebuilt identity. That's how you know you've truly escaped. When you look back at this entire journey, you'll notice a truth very different from the usual idea of defeating a narcissist. You don't win by arguing. Not by proving you're right. Not by watching them collapse or feel remorse. You win by no longer needing to win at all. The 8 weapons we explored: piercing intuition, intentional silence, non-negotiable boundaries, truth for justice, self-recovery and identity reconstruction, strategic patience, stepping off the stage, and finally refusing your old self, were never meant to attack. They were meant to bring you home. Home to an identity that is no longer triggerable. Home to a nervous system no longer living in constant alert. Home to a life where your worth doesn't need external confirmation. If you're listening to this and you're still hurting, remember this: you are not weak, you are transforming. Don't rush back just to escape emptiness. Don't break silence just to feel seen. Give yourself the time to grow strong from the inside out. The only advice here is this: protect your peace as something sacred. Anyone who asks you to trade it, whether through memory, promises, or guilt, does not deserve access to your life again. And if you've made it this far, congratulations. Not because they lost power, but because you reclaimed yourself.